Claire stood in the lawyer's office, staring at the papers in disbelief. Her 7-year-old son, Ethan, sat beside her, swinging his legs, oblivious to the life-changing moment unfolding. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake," Claire said, pushing the documents back across the desk. "I don't have an Uncle Raymond. I don't know anyone named Raymond Blackwell." The lawyer, a patient man in his 60s named Mr. Harrison, pushed his glasses up his nose and consulted his notes. "Raymond Blackwell was your father's half-brother. They shared the same mother but had different fathers. According to my records, they lost contact after your grandmother passed away in 1987. Claire tried to process this. Her father had died when she was 12, and she'd never heard him mention a half-brother. "Why would he leave me anything?" "According to the letter he left with his will, he'd been following your life from a distance. He never married, had no children. You're his only living relative. He wanted you to have the farm." "The farm?" Claire looked down at the papers again, at the address listed. 4782 Old Mill Road, population unincorporated. "What kind of farm?" Mr. Harrison's expression turned apologetic. It's been abandoned for quite some time. Mr. Blackwell lived there alone for many years, but in his final years he was in assisted living. The property has been vacant for 7 years. I should warn you, it's not in good condition." Not in good condition turned out to be a massive understatement. Claire had driven out to see it the next day, Ethan strapped in his booster seat in the back of her aging Honda. The car had made concerning noises the entire hour-long drive out of the city, through suburbs, through small towns, and finally onto a rutted dirt road that led to what could only generously be called a farmhouse. It was a disaster. The 2-story structure looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. White paint peeled from the siding in long, curling strips. Several windows were broken, boarded up with plywood that had seen better decades. The front porch sagged dangerously in the middle. The roof was missing shingles in so many places it looked like a mouth missing teeth. Behind the house stood a barn that wasn't in much better shape. Its red paint faded to a dull rust color, its doors hanging askew on broken hinges. The property was surrounded by overgrown fields, dead grass and weeds reaching nearly waist-high. "Is this where we're going to live?" Ethan had asked, his voice small. Claire had wanted to cry. Instead, she'd forced a smile. "We're just looking today, buddy." But the truth was, she didn't have many other options. The divorce from Marcus had been finalized 3 months ago, and he'd managed to keep most of their assets through a lawyer that cost more than Claire made in a year at her receptionist job. She had Ethan, her car, and about $3,000 in savings. Her apartment lease was ending in 2 months, and she couldn't afford to renew it. This farmhouse, as terrible as it was paid off. The property taxes were only $800 a year. If she could make it livable, somehow, it would be a roof over their heads that she actually owned. Over the next week, Claire told people about her inheritance. The reactions were uniform. Mockery. Her ex-husband Marcus had laughed when she told him during a custody exchange. "You inherited a dump? Perfect. That's about what you deserve. Just make sure my son has a decent place to sleep when he's there." Her sister Diane had been more sympathetic, but equally discouraging. "Claire, honey, you can't seriously be thinking of moving there. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's no way you can fix that place up on your budget. Just sell it and use the money for an apartment deposit." "I tried," Claire had explained. 3 real estate agents came out to look at it. They all said the same thing. It's worth maybe $20,000 for the land, but the cost to demolish the buildings would be $15,000. No one wants to buy it. Her co-workers at the dental office where she worked had been even less kind. Jessica, who'd always been competitive with Claire, had actually taken a photo of the farmhouse that Claire had shown them and posted it on social media with the caption, "When you inherit your dreams and they look like a horror movie set. #condemned, #yikes." The post had gotten 73 likes and dozens of comments, all of them mocking. Claire had deleted her social media accounts that same day. Her mother had been the worst. "I always said you made poor decisions, Claire. Marrying Marcus, having a baby too young, and now this. Moving to some abandoned shack? You're going to raise my grandson in a place that should be bulldozed?" But Claire had made her decision. She couldn't afford anything else, and maybe, just maybe, the house was better on the inside than the outside suggested. It wasn't. The interior was somehow worse than the exterior. Every room smelled of mold and abandonment. The wallpaper, a horrific floral pattern from what looked like the 1960s, peeled away from walls in long strips. The hardwood floors were warped and water-damaged. The kitchen appliances were ancient, a 1950s-era stove, a refrigerator that was more rust than white enamel. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub that was the only genuinely beautiful thing in the house, but the toilet was cracked, and the sink had no faucet at all. Upstairs, the 2 bedrooms were filled with Uncle Raymond's abandoned possessions: moldy boxes, old furniture, piles of newspapers that had sat undisturbed for years. Claire had stood in the middle of the larger bedroom and actually cried. What had she been thinking? This place was uninhabitable. She couldn't bring Ethan here. Everyone had been right to mock her, but then Ethan had found her, tugged on her hand and said, "Mum, look what I found in the barn." He'd been holding a dusty mason jar filled with old marbles, his face lit up with excitement. "Can I keep these? They're so cool." Looking at her son's joy over something so simple, Claire had made a decision. They would make this work. Somehow. She'd spent the next month preparing. She'd taken on extra shifts at the dental office, sold most of their furniture that wouldn't fit anyway, and bought basic supplies: cleaning products, a few tools, work gloves, contractor bags for trash. She'd watched countless YouTube videos on home repair and restoration. 2 days before her apartment lease ended, she and Ethan had moved to the farmhouse with a borrowed trailer containing 2 mattresses, a folding table, 4 folding chairs, their clothes, Ethan's toys, and cleaning supplies. The first night had been rough. The electricity worked, barely, but the heating system didn't. They'd slept in sleeping bags on their mattresses, both of them fully dressed. Ethan curled against her for warmth. She'd lain awake most of the night, listening to the house creak and settle, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. But morning had brought sunshine through the broken windows and a strange sense of possibility. Claire had established a routine. Every day before work, she'd do 2 hours of cleaning or repair work. Every evening, after picking Ethan up from his after-school program, she'd do 3 more hours while he did homework or played. Every weekend, they'd work together on the house. Slowly, painfully slowly, progress happened. She'd cleaned out the kitchen first, scrubbing decades of grime off surfaces, bleaching away mold, making the space functional. The ancient appliances actually worked once she'd cleaned them. She'd patched the worst of the roof leaks with supplies from the hardware store, following online tutorials. She'd repaired broken windows with glass she'd salvaged from the barn. The community, such as it was, had been less than welcoming. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away, a farmer named Hank, who'd stopped by once to tell her that Raymond had been strange, and that she should probably just tear the place down and move on. The town itself, a tiny place called Millbrook, 15 minutes away, had a population of maybe 800 people. Everyone seemed to know everyone, and they'd all heard about the city woman trying to fix up the Blackwell place. At the hardware store, the owner had actually laughed when she'd asked about materials for repairing the porch. "You're wasting your money, sweetheart. That house should have been demolished 20 years ago." At the grocery store, she'd overheard two women talking. "Did you see that woman and her kid living in the old Blackwell place? Child services should get involved. That's no place for a child." Even Ethan's new school had been problematic. The teachers were kind enough, but some of the other kids had started calling him Junkyard Boy when they'd learned where he lived. Ethan had come home crying twice, and Claire's heart had broken both times. But they'd pushed forward. Claire had learned that she was stronger than she'd thought, capable of things she'd never imagined. She'd learned basic plumbing, electrical work, carpentry. She'd become skilled with a hammer, a drill, a paintbrush. Her hands developed calluses, her arms grew stronger, her confidence built with each small victory. By October, 3 months after moving in, the house was actually becoming livable. The roof no longer leaked. All the windows were intact. The kitchen and 1 bathroom worked. 2 bedrooms upstairs were cleaned, painted, and furnished. The living room downstairs had been transformed from a moldy disaster to a cozy space with furniture she'd bought at thrift stores and refinished herself. Ethan had adapted better than she'd hoped. He loved the space, the freedom to explore, the adventure of living somewhere so different from their old apartment. He'd made a fort in the barn, had adopted a stray cat that showed up one day, had started a collection of treasures he found around the property. Interesting rocks, old bottles, rusty tools. But the mockery continued. Marcus had filed a motion to modify custody, claiming the farmhouse was an unsuitable environment for Ethan. Her mother refused to visit, saying she wouldn't set foot in that death trap. Her former friends from the city had stopped calling entirely. Claire had learned to ignore it, to focus on the work, on Ethan, on making their house a home. Then, in mid-November, she'd decided to tackle the upstairs attic. She'd been putting it off because it was the worst space in the house, filled with decades of Raymond's accumulated possessions, dusty and dark, with questionable structural integrity. But winter was coming, and she needed to insulate the attic properly to keep heating costs down. On a Saturday morning, while Ethan played with his cat downstairs, Claire had climbed the narrow attic stairs with garbage bags, work gloves, and determination. The attic was exactly as terrible as she'd expected. Boxes everywhere, old furniture, piles of moldy clothes. She'd started systematically going through everything, throwing most of it away, occasionally finding something worth keeping, an old photograph, a decent piece of furniture she could refinish. She'd been working for about 3 hours when she'd moved a particularly heavy wardrobe away from the wall to check for water damage. Behind it, she'd found something odd. A section of the wall that didn't match the rest. The wallpaper was different, the boards newer. Curious, Claire had pushed on it. One of the boards had given way slightly, revealing darkness behind it. Her heart had started racing. Was this just shoddy construction? Some old repair job? Or was it? She grabbed a hammer from her tool bag and carefully pried the boards away. They came off easily, clearly having been designed to be removable. Behind the false wall was a small space, maybe 4 feet by 4 feet. And in that space were boxes. Lots of boxes, all of them sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. Claire had pulled out the first box, her hands shaking. It was heavier than she'd expected. She'd set it down, pulled out her phone for light, and carefully opened it. Inside, wrapped in old newspapers from 1965, were paintings. Small paintings, each maybe 12 by 16 inches, all of them in ornate gold frames. She'd pulled one out carefully, shining her phone light on it. The painting showed a rural scene, farmers working in a field, painted in a style that looked old, impressionistic. In the bottom right corner was a signature she couldn't quite make out. Her heart had started pounding. She'd pulled out another painting, another rural scene, Different but similar in style. Another signature. She'd gone through the box. 10 paintings, all similar, all signed, all clearly very old. Then she'd opened the second box. More paintings, 15 of them. The third box held 12. By the time she'd pulled all the boxes out of the hiding space, she'd counted 8 boxes total, 57 paintings in all. Claire had sat in the dusty attic, surrounded by paintings, her mind racing. Why would Uncle Raymond hide paintings in a wall? Were they valuable? Were they stolen? Were they just prints that he thought were special? She'd carefully taken photos of several paintings, including close-ups of the signatures. Then she'd done what anyone in the modern era would do. She'd Googled them. The first signature she'd typed in had made her drop her phone. The signature was C. Pizarro. Camille Pizarro, the famous French Impressionist painter, one of the founders of the Impressionist movement. With shaking hands, she'd picked up her phone and typed more carefully. Camille Pizarro Paintings Values. The results had made her head spin. Pizarro paintings sold at auction for millions of dollars. One had recently sold for $15 million. She checked another signature on another painting. A. Sisley. Alfred Sisley, another famous impressionist. His paintings also sold for millions. Claire had actually started hyperventilating. This couldn't be real. These couldn't be authentic. They had to be replicas, prints, copies. But even as she'd thought it, she'd known. The weight of them, the way the paint had texture, the aging of the canvases, the style of the frames. These were old, really old. She'd spent the rest of that day carefully moving all the paintings down from the attic to her bedroom, hiding them in her closet. She'd told Ethan she'd found some old art, but hadn't explained further. That night, after Ethan was asleep, she'd researched obsessively. Camille Pizarro, Alfred Sisley. She'd found a third artist whose signature she'd recognized. Gustave Caillebotte. All of them French Impressionists, all of them painting in the late 1800s, all of them now considered masters whose works sold for staggering amounts. By Monday morning, Claire had found the contact information for an art expert at a major auction house in New York City. She'd called, her voice shaking, and explained that she'd inherited some paintings that might be authentic Impressionist works and needed them authenticated. The woman she'd spoken to, Dr. Patricia Lawson, had been skeptical but professional. People find old paintings all the time, Mrs. Mitchell. The vast majority turn out to be prints or reproductions. But if you'd like to bring them in, we can take a look. Our authentication fee is $500 per painting. Claire had done the math. 57 paintings times $500 would be over $28,000, money she absolutely didn't have. What if I brought you just one or two to start? Claire had asked. If those are authentic, would you waive the fees for the rest? Doctor, Lawson had laughed. If you bring me authentic Pizarro and Sisley paintings, Mrs. Mitchell, I'll personally cover any fees. But I'm telling you, that's extraordinarily unlikely. Claire had made an appointment for the following week. She'd taken 2 days off work, packed 3 of the most promising paintings carefully in blankets and a suitcase, and driven the 5 hours to New York City with Ethan, who'd thought they were going on an adventure. Dr. Lawson's office had been intimidating, all glass and modern art, in a building that screamed wealth. Claire had felt completely out of place in her Target jeans and worn jacket, carrying a battered suitcase. Dr. Lawson had been in her 50s, elegant, professional, and clearly expecting to dismiss Claire quickly. "Let's see what you've brought," she'd said, in a tone that suggested she was doing Claire a favor. Claire had opened the suitcase and carefully unwrapped the first painting. Dr. Lawson's expression had changed immediately. She'd gone very still, then leaned forward, then grabbed a magnifying glass from her desk. She'd studied the painting for a long moment in silence. "Where did you get this?" Her voice had been sharp. "I inherited a farmhouse from my uncle. I found these hidden in a wall in the attic." Hidden in a wall? Dr. Lawson had set down the magnifying glass and looked at Claire directly. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you a very serious question. Is there any possibility these paintings are stolen?" Claire's heart had sunk. I don't know. My uncle was a private man. I never knew him. I have no idea where he got them." Dr. Lawson had nodded slowly. "I'm going to need to run these through several databases, check them against records of stolen art. But I need to tell you something." She'd paused, her expression serious. "If this painting is authentic, and I believe it is, it's worth approximately $3 to $4 million. Claire had actually swayed on her feet. Ethan had grabbed a hand, looking worried. "You said you have more?" Dr. Lawson had asked. 57 total. Different artists. All impressionists, I think." Dr. Lawson had actually laughed, a shocked, disbelieving sound. "You're telling me you have 57 potentially authentic impressionist paintings hidden in a farmhouse?" "Yes." What followed had been the strangest 3 weeks of Claire's life. Dr. Lawson had insisted on coming to the farmhouse personally with a team of experts. They'd descended on the property like an art SWAT team, authenticators, conservators, security personnel. For 3 days, they'd examined every painting, taking photographs, analyzing paint samples, checking provenance. The neighbor, Hank, had driven by twice, his truck slowing down as he'd stared at all the expensive cars in Claire's driveway. The experts had determined that all 57 paintings were authentic. More importantly, they'd run them through every stolen art database in existence. None of the paintings had been reported stolen. The provenance trail was incomplete, but what they could trace suggested Raymond had purchased them legally over many decades, starting in the 1950s when Impressionist art was far less expensive. Dr. Lawson's theory was that Raymond had been a savvy collector who'd bought the paintings when they were undervalued, then hidden them away, perhaps not trusting banks or worried about theft. He'd apparently never told anyone about them. The estimated value of the collection, conservative auction estimate, was $112 million. Claire had actually fainted when they'd told her. She'd come to with Ethan patting her face, crying, and Dr. Lawson calling for water. $112 million. Dr. Lawson had repeated, once Claire could focus. And that's conservative. At auction, with the right publicity, we could potentially see significantly more. This is one of the most significant private collections of French Impressionist art to be discovered in decades. The news had broken nationally within days. "Single mother discovers $100 million art collection in farmhouse attic," had been the headline. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to Claire. News crews descended on the property. Her phone rang constantly with journalists, documentary producers, representatives from museums. The mockery had stopped immediately and completely. Marcus had called, his voice oily with false warmth. "Claire, I always believed in you. I always knew you were special. Listen, about Ethan's custody arrangement. I think we should talk about what's best for him now that your circumstances have changed." Her mother had called, crying, apologizing for everything she'd said. "I always supported you, honey. I just wanted to protect you from disappointment." Her sister Diane had posted on social media about how proud she was of her brave, amazing sister who never gave up. The women from the dental office had all suddenly wanted to be her best friend. Jessica had even sent a gift basket with a card that read, Always knew you'd make it big." The hardware store owner who'd mocked her had called to congratulate her and ask if she needed any materials for renovations. Everything at cost, of course, friend discount. Even the teachers at Ethan's school had called to say how wonderful it was, and could Mrs. Mitchell perhaps donate to the school's art program? Claire had dealt with all of it with a grace she didn't feel. The truth was, she was overwhelmed. The money was life-changing, certainly, but it also brought complications. She'd hired lawyers, accountants, financial advisors. She'd had to arrange for security for the paintings, which were moved to a secure facility. She'd had to make decisions about whether to auction them or sell privately, whether to keep any, how to structure the estate to minimize taxes. Through it all, Ethan had kept her grounded. "Mom, does this mean we have to leave our house?" he'd asked one evening, as they sat on the renovated porch watching the sun set over their fields. "Do you want to leave?" Claire had asked. "No, I like it here. I like my room, I like the barn, I like my cat." Claire had pulled him close. "Then we're staying. The money means we can fix the house properly now, make it really nice. But this is our home." And they had stayed. Claire had hired contractors to do the major renovation work she couldn't do herself. New roof, new foundation repairs, updated electrical and plumbing throughout. But she'd insisted on doing much of the cosmetic work herself, because she'd come to love it. The farmhouse had been transformed. The sagging porch was now solid and beautiful, with new railings she'd helped build. The exterior had been sided and painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. The barn had been restored to its former glory, the red paint bright again. The fields had been cleared and planted with wildflowers. The interior was a perfect blend of historic charm and modern comfort. The original hardwood floors refinished and gleaming, the walls painted in warm colors, the kitchen updated with new appliances, but maintaining its vintage character. 6 months after finding the paintings, Claire had held a small dinner party at the farmhouse. She'd invited Dr. Lawson, who'd become a friend. She'd invited Hank, the neighbor, who'd apologized for his initial rudeness. She'd invited a few people from town who'd been genuinely kind. She'd even invited her mother and sister, though the evening had been awkward. She hadn't invited Marcus, Jessica, or anyone else who'd mocked her and then tried to crawl back when she had money. As they'd sat on the porch after dinner, Dr. Lawson had asked, "Do you ever regret it? Everyone knowing about the paintings? You could have sold them quietly, kept your privacy." Claire had thought about it. "No. I needed people to see that the junk farmhouse they mocked was actually a treasure. That the single mom they looked down on was actually doing just fine. That being different and struggling doesn't make you less than anyone else." "You've certainly proven that," Dr. Lawson had smiled. "What are you going to do with all that money?" Claire had looked out at her property, at Ethan playing with his cat in the yard, at the home she'd built from nothing. "First, I'm setting up trust funds for Ethan's education. Second, I'm starting a foundation to help other single mothers, housing assistance, job training, childcare. Third, I'm keeping 3 of the paintings. The rest will be auctioned, and honestly, I don't need anywhere near $100 million. The foundation will get most of it." "You're keeping 3 paintings? Which ones?" 3 small landscapes by Pizarro. Uncle Raymond must have loved them to hide them so carefully. I feel like I should keep part of his collection together, and they're beautiful. Every time I look at them, I'll remember that treasures can be hidden in the most unexpected places. A year after finding the paintings, Claire had stood at the podium of a major auction house in New York City. The auction of the remaining 54 paintings had been a major event, broadcast internationally, with the art world watching. The paintings had sold for a total of $147 million, well above the original estimate. Claire had used her portion to fund the Claire Blackwell Foundation, named after both herself and the uncle who'd, unknowingly, changed her life. The foundation had helped over 300 single mothers in its first year, providing housing assistance, job training, childcare support, and emergency funds. She'd also purchased 3 adjacent properties to their farmhouse, expanding their land. She'd started a small organic farm, selling produce at local farmers markets, employing several people from town. She'd renovated the barn into a community art space, offering free classes to local children. Ethan had thrived. He was doing well in school, had made good friends, and had developed a passion for painting, inspired, perhaps, by the masterpieces that had been hidden in his attic. His room was filled with his own artwork, and Claire had already decided that whatever he created, it would be treasured. Because art wasn't just about monetary value, it was about creativity, expression, seeing the world differently. One evening, almost 2 years after moving to the farmhouse, Claire had sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching another sunset. Her phone had rung, Marcus calling for the 4th time that week, still trying to negotiate some kind of settlement, still believing he deserved something from her discovery. She'd declined the call and blocked his number. The farmhouse that everyone had mocked was now featured in architectural magazines as a stunning example of historic restoration. The property that everyone had said she should demolish was now appraised at over $3 million, even without the paintings. The life that everyone had pitied was now envied. But the most valuable thing Claire had discovered wasn't in the paintings, as precious as they were. It was the knowledge that she was capable, strong, resourceful, and brave. That she could take something everyone else saw as worthless and recognize its potential. That she could stand alone when necessary, work hard when required, and build something beautiful from ruins. The paintings had been worth $100 million, but the lesson, that treasures are often hidden, that value isn't always obvious, that mockery says more about the mocker than the mocked, that was priceless. As the sun set over her fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have made the Impressionists proud, Claire smiled. Let them mock, she thought. Let them judge and criticize and assume they know better. Because she'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply living well, building something beautiful, and proving that every single person who doubted you was wrong. The junk farmhouse had held $100 million secret, but the real treasure had been the strength Claire found within herself to claim it.